Hello and welcome to Competition in the Age of Ecosystems, a two-day virtual event exploring the new realities of ecosystem-based competition. I'm Stuart Craner, co-founder of Thinkers 50 and director of the Business Ecosystem Alliance. This event is a partnership between the Business Ecosystem Alliance, Outthinker, Thinkers 50 and the Higher Management Institute. We're delighted that people from more than 50 countries have signed up. Thank you for joining us if you are with us live or watching a recording. A Mandarin translation is available for all of the sessions. In addition to the live sessions, there are a number of fantastic pre-recorded sessions which are also now available. As always, please let us know where you are joining us from and ask questions in the chat or question box at any time during the session. We really appreciate your insights and input. And now to our next session. Our theme for this session is corporate co-evolution, a concept which is going to be explained to us by Thierry Isckia and Xavier Parisot. Thierry is joining us from Paris, Xavier from Thailand, Bangkok. Thierry and Xavier will explore the meaning of corporate co-evolution, why it is critical for business ecosystems, and the capabilities required to trigger co-evolution in ecosystems and at each stage of an ecosystem's life cycle. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And now I would like to hand over to Thierry and Xavier to take it from here.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you, Monica, for welcoming us and for giving us the opportunity to present our work on co-evolution in this wonderful event. We are very glad to be part of it. So let me share my screen with you. Here we are. So let's start immediately with the context. In many articles, papers, books, for practitioners or for scholars, you can see that co-evolution is a central characteristic of the business ecosystems. It is sometimes even qualified as the key characteristic that qualify this particular organizational structure compared with any other forms of organization. Usually, business ecosystems and their co-evolutionary mechanisms emerge in a very particular context, and that context is always turbulent. There is a lot of change, knowledge is evolving fast, we are in knowledge-intensive sectors, and these changes will trigger some new forms of interactions between firms within some specific industry. The goal can be multiple and is always to survive together when we would have died alone. And if the goal can be specific to each type of ecosystem, co-evolution is always a central mechanism that is attached to the emergence and the development of business ecosystems. James Moore himself in '96 was defining business ecosystem as firms co-evolving their capabilities. So let's start to better understand what is co-evolution. Let's start by defining what is evolution. Why? Because co-evolution cannot exist without an evolutionary process. Co-evolution is a subset of evolution. And since most of the concept and the ideas connected to evolution and co-evolution has been borrowed from biology, we need to go back to biology to understand what is evolution. Evolution in biology is not a simple concept process to understand, since it is connected to at least 9 different paradigms in biology. First, you have 3 paradigms in genetics with the Lamarckism, the Darwinism, and the Gouldism, and you also have 3 paradigms in ecology with the evolutionary ecology, the population ecology, and the ecosystem ecology. And all these paradigms are connected together to generate specific mechanisms which are connected to selective pressure which will emerge with the change in the physical and the biological environment, and this will lead to the evolution of the species. So once we have defined evolution in biology, we need to compare with business. So how is evolution perceived in business by different authors nowadays? There is a first process that is very clear and is described by the group of so-called selectionists, which start with the emergence of new projects at the operational level that will be selected at the middle management level and finally chosen at the executive level. And this will emerge, this will generate variations within the organization. But that process is not alone, and it is complemented by another process described by the adaptationists, which are most of them supporting the entrepreneurial view. And this process starts with the sensing of market opportunities, the seizing of the best opportunities, the test of these opportunities at the middle management level, and finally the implementation of the best opportunities at the operational level, which will lead to the transformation of the organizational routines. So as you can see, these are feedback loops that operates in the evolutionary process in business, because there's two opposite forces working permanently and simultaneously and bringing projects within the organization. And this implies that the middle manager has a key position, is playing an important role, since he is the one selecting the best projects coming from the bottom and coming from the top, and is aligning this selection of the projects to evolve the organization. So as you can see, evolution in business is not following the same structure and is not going through the same processes compared to biology. Why is it so? Because in biology, everything is automatic, and the phenomenon of selection, natural selection, sexual selection, are passive. They are operating naturally, automatically. In business, the situation is different, since there is an active process of sensing, seizing, and testing the market opportunities simultaneously to the spontaneous emergence of new projects at the operational level. And this is the balance of the selection of both these ideas coming from the top and the bottom that will lead to the evolution of the company. This evolutionary process is therefore connected to two feedback loops, which are connecting the different scales within the organization, and three feedback loops, which are operating in each of these scales to detect and select the new projects or the new ideas within the firm. So the question now that we have defined what is evolution is what is co-evolution. And co-evolution in biology, as you will see, is not quite the same compared with co-evolution in business. So let's start with basic definitions in biology. In biology, co-evolution exists at different levels and engage different types of interactions between species. Co-evolution exists between competing species. It can be exploitative and it can be mutual. So it means that in all these cases, there are some interdependencies between the species that will lead to a co-evolutionary process between these species. In most of the cases, these co-evolutionary processes will be bilateral. They are sometimes multilateral, but in most of the cases for the competitive exploitative co-evolutions, it is bipartite, bilateral. When it comes to the mutualism, it can be multilateral. Why? Because mutualist, the species that allow the mutualism to happen, are rare, and they attract a lot of species that would like to benefit from that mutualist. There is an element that needs to be noted here, is that commensalism is not coevolution. Why? Because in commensalism, there is a species benefiting from another one, but that one is not under selective pressure. And if there is no evolution for species B, there is no possibility of co-evolution. In all these forms of interactions in biology, there is a high level of interdependency between the involved species. Now, when you look how coevolution is evolving from a bilateral to a multilateral process in biology, you understand that the mutualist is a species that develop its ability to cooperate and collaborate and co-evaluate with another one. And first, that mutualist will co-evaluate with one other species. This is what we call pairwise co-evolution, bilateral co-evolution. But this will evolve to reach very fast a multilateral co-evolution, since, as I mentioned before, mutualists are rare, and species living in the same ecosystem will tend to converge their evolutionary process to be able to benefit from the mutualist and from the possible co-evolution with that mutualist. In the biology, what is not co-evolution, I already mentioned commensalism, but co-adaptation is neither co-evolution, since in that case, it is a reversible adaptation that is not genetically fixed. It means that that change will not be permanent and therefore cannot be qualified as co-evolution. Convergent evolution is neither co-evolution, since this is the evolution of one species tending to reach a specific goal, for example, being able to co-evaluate with the mutualist. In business, the situation is quite different. So what is the situation in business? First, there are multiple forms of interactions in business: competitive, cooperative, collaborative, and finally co-evolutive. If some cases of competitive co-evolution are mentioned in the literature and bring some empirical evidences, in reality, they are not co-evolution, they are simply convergent evolution of companies competing to develop capabilities to generate better business models to keep their competitive advantage. And this cannot be qualified, as it is mentioned sometimes in the literature, as co-evolution, because this is in fact convergent evolution. Even when companies are using their competitive intelligence to spy on their competitors and to progress faster, to develop new business models, new differentiation factors, competitive advantage, this is neither co-evolution. This is again a form of either co-adaptation or convergent evolution. It means that in business, there is only one form of co-evolution, and it is when the firms are both benefiting on each side from the evolution of each other, and this will stimulate the growth of the companies involved in the partnership. There is another difference, which is the increasing level of interdependency. Interdependency between competitors is at the lowest level, and the more the nature of the relationship between the firms will evolve from competition to cooperation, to collaboration, to co-evolution, and the more that level of interdependency, of path dependency will increase because this switch increase the exchanges that are happening between the firms. In business, as in biology, companies tend to develop first two-sided co-evolution. It means that the keystone or the mutualist within the ecosystem start to collaborate with, for example, one historical partner, and he will switch from collaboration to co-evolution because he's ready, his capabilities to share his value proposition and to generate the needed exchange between firms to trigger the co-creation of the value proposition exist already. But from that a single bilateral co-evolution, the mutualist is able to switch to a multilateral co-evolution process by involving more and more historical partners or complementers, and sometimes even by involving the customers. Some firms within, around the ecosystem of the mutualist will tend to converge the development of their capabilities to be able to benefit from the keystone, the mutualist. In some cases, some competing firms in the same industry will fight each other to be the first to be able to collaborate and then co-evaluate with the mutualist. This is why co-opetition is one of the key characteristics of business ecosystems. So what is not co-evolution in business? As we mentioned for biology, when only one firm is converging its capabilities to be able to finally benefit from a relationship with the mutualist, it is not yet co-evolution, and it is just a convergent evolution or one-sided evolution. If the firm who is working with the mutualist is working punctually and developing punctually an element with the mutualist, this is co-adaptation. The change will not be permanent, and this is not co-evolution again. Firms that will tend to copy the value proposition of the business ecosystem, to imitate what they are creating, are not in a co-evolutionary process neither, since the nature of their interactions do not allow the switch from cooperation to collaboration to co-evolution. Once we have defined evolution and co-evolution in biology and in the firms, we can finally speak about the key characteristics that really qualify the co-evolutionary mechanisms in business. The first characteristic is the specificity. As in biology, each business ecosystem is unique. The context of its emergence is unique. The level of rivalry, the path dependencies, the knowledge, the intellectual property that needs to be accessed, the laws, the policies, the country, everything is unique. And that specificity really defines the basic of what is co-evolution. The nature of the actors which will be involved since the beginning and the choice of developing a two-sided or a multi-sided co-evolutionary process is also specific. For sure, the location of the interactions, if they are physical interactions, geographical interactions, or digital interactions, will also determine the uniqueness of the business ecosystem. The second parameter is about the reciprocity. Reciprocity means that each time one member of the ecosystem is evolving, this evolution will affect the evolution of the other members. But that reciprocity is not simultaneous. We can read in many papers that one of the characteristics of co-evolution is the simultaneity. In my opinion, it's a mistake. There is a sequence. That sequence starts with the keystone sharing its value proposition with the members of the ecosystem. And because of that starting point, he will be able to transform the collaborations with his historical partners into the first cycle of co-evolution. And this choice is an active one. It's coordinated, often through a platform, and this will trigger the reciprocity of the evolution of the partners. The next parameter is the fixation of the changes which become permanent in the ecosystem, in each firm's member of the ecosystem. What does it mean? It means that the evolution, reciprocal evolution, will lead to new patterns of organizational routines that will be replicated within each firm to turn to the alignment between the capabilities of the members of the ecosystem, but also to the possibility for the members to co-create the value, co-evaluate that value, and finally reach the market with a compelling value proposition, which is collective. There is another parameter which qualifies the co-evolutionary mechanisms, which is the boundary crossing. As in evolution, as in evolution in biology and in business, the co-evolutionary mechanisms transcend the scales, they transcend the industries, they transcend the boundaries of the firms. And this is the source of the complexity of the understanding of the co-evolutionary mechanism. When a mechanism is happening across the scales, across the boundaries, and across the industries, it becomes very difficult to qualify it and to determine it. And the final characteristic of the co-evolutionary mechanisms is that they are organically derived. Again, in business, it means that the keystone will have to manage constantly all these ideas coming from the bottom and coming from the top, coming from scrutinizing the market for market opportunities on one side, and coming from operational projects proposed in each firm, and all these ideas will have to be selected, coordinated at the platform level to make sure that there is an alignment in the bundle of the value proposition. So now, if we reposition these characteristics of coevolution in the life cycle of the ecosystem, the first characteristic that will emerge is the specificity, because this is the one that determines the nature of the core members of the business ecosystem since the start, even before its real birth, because the goal of the keystone, the first goal is first to switch the nature of the relationship with its partners, customers, complementary suppliers, from cooperation to collaboration, to finally trigger the first sequence of co-evolution that will mark the birth of the ecosystem. And this process happened around the alignment, the reciprocal alignment of the capabilities between the keystone and the partners who try to work together at the co-creation, of the value proposition. And this first cycle of co-evolution will lead to a new cycle during the expansion stage. And during the expansion stage, the capabilities are aligned enough to start to co-evolve between the keystone and its partners. And there's this co-evolution of the capabilities of the ecosystemic members will allow the co-creation of the value proposition and the launch of that value proposition on a large market. At this stage, we see that the sequentiality of the connection and the evolution of the relationship between the partners is becoming critical. The reciprocity of the evolution of the members is already happened twice in the birth and during the expansion, and the members of the ecosystem see their feeling of community grow step by step, and now they are no more in a client-supplier relationship, they are in a partnership relationship, they are part of the same family working together on the development, the co-creation of that value proposition. This will often lead to the attraction of new partners owning some IP or some interesting building blocks for the bundle of the value proposition to be complete. It means that there is an expansion of the boundaries of the business ecosystem, but that these boundaries are also showing a level of porosity, a loose coupling that allow members to get in or to get out. This level of porosity is variable along the different stages of the business ecosystem, since you will see the leader will tend to close the boundaries at the next stage, which is the leadership. During the leadership, the main goal is to co-evolve the value proposition with the customers on one side and with the suppliers on the other, to maintain a huge and important bargaining power on both sides and to ensure the leadership of the ecosystem on the market. The feeling of belonging of the partners as member of one community is still increasing at the leadership stage, but this will not be opposed to the entering of new partners during the self-renewal of the ecosystem, to make sure that we can integrate the innovators that could build alternative ecosystem, and if we integrate them, we avoid them to build competing value propositions. The survival of the ecosystem at this stage implies the maintaining of high switching costs and sometimes even the restructuration of the ecosystem to survive competing ecosystems. So now that we have determined what are the characteristics of coevolution in business ecosystems and how they are sequenced along the life cycle of the business ecosystem, we can speak about these learning processes which are connected to the switch from cooperation to collaboration to co-evolution. And these processes, they are coming from, first, the evolutionary process of each firm within the ecosystem. This evolutionary process implies that the firm is learning constantly internally and from the partners externally to align the evolution of each firm with the evolution of the partners within the ecosystem. It means that, as Nonaka and Takeshi, Watkin and Marzik mentioned, each firm needs to implement a learning organization view to empower these learning processes, internal and external, to empower their ability to coordinate their activity with the partners within the ecosystem. These feedback loops are critical and they engage mostly the middle managers, which are really at the challenging point, selecting the project coming from the ecosystem, selecting the projects coming from the operational level, and determining which ones are the critical ones for the success of the ecosystem. As you can imagine, these learning processes are more and more complex when you switch from internal to external to ecosystemic learning processes. So now let's take a look at the critical capabilities which are involved in the among the partners within the ecosystem, but also across the platform along the life cycle of the business ecosystem. As we mentioned already, at the birth of the business ecosystem, and to allow its birth, the keystone needs to develop its connective capability, its ability to attract partners around the initial value proposition and to foster interactions with these historical initial partners to build that community, to get new ideas, to evolve the first time this initial value proposition, and then to structure all the ideas into a compelling value proposition that will lead to a new business model. It involves also the development of technical capabilities, which are multi-party, coming from different partners, and which must be aligned to experiment the value proposition and perhaps to emerge a standard. You can imagine that at that moment, these capabilities I am talking about, relational capabilities, value proposition structuration capability, technical capabilities, are not in the end of one actor anymore, they are at the ecosystemic level. It means that beyond the capabilities of each firm in the ecosystem, some capabilities will emerge across the firms, between the firms, and these capabilities are critical at each stage of the life cycle of the business ecosystem. At the expansion stage, it is obvious that the keystone will try to first attract some additional complementers, and this is becoming an ecosystemic capability because the partners will help the keystone to select the best potential partners to scale up the collective value proposition and to bring the compelling value proposition to a large market, and finally, to coordinate the production, the distribution, the marketing, and the sales. At the leadership stage, the situation evolves again, and this time we are focusing on the value proposition co-evolution and all the mechanisms that will help the keystone to increase its bargaining power with its customers and partners will be used, will be applied, such as the increase of customer centricity, the increase of economies of scales, the increase of the price performance balance, the increase of the path dependencies between the actors, of the value of the brand, of the switching cost. All these mechanisms will be coordinated at the ecosystemic level to make sure that the keystone keep the leadership over the value proposition. And finally, at the self-renewal stage, some new partners are coming, entering the ecosystem, and they are again going through all the cycles of co-evolution, and they are bringing new building blocks, new elements for the value proposition to evolve. It means that the first critical ecosystemic capability is to change the web of collaboration links. We need to incorporate new innovations, new ideas. At the same time, we also need to slow down the growth of competing ecosystems and to maintain high switching costs. So, as Thierry?
Yes, just to add a few points on the presentation, it just rehabilitate what we already know is about business ecosystem, is that, following the Clue Trade Manifesto, which state that, markets are conversation, I would say that business ecosystem are conversation. And basically the main objective of a Keystone organization or wannabe Keystone organization is just to manage interaction. You were talking about platforms, in your presentation, Xavier, but the point is that it's the main artifact used by those who want to manage large web of network of interaction. This is the main and the most powerful tool to do this job. So it's just about enabling interaction, and that's the reason why also we can talk about coevolution and evolution. It's because interaction, okay, and these interaction have to be orchestrated for time, for the whole business ecosystem life cycle. And that's the reason why talking about coevolution or evolution is something complex. I mean, from a managerial point of view, it's just a result. You are faced to complex mechanism at different scale with different partners. But at the end, to summarize, I would say that it's all about interaction and the way you manage interaction. And in what you mentioned, Xavier, it clearly appears that there is, and maybe it's a point you could come back or explore a little bit further. It stems that there is a kind of patterns at the end. If you're looking at the slide, you know, there is a cycle of local interaction, and then at the end, it's evolving a kind of evolution or coevolution. But there is a pattern. That's the reason why it's important. I mean, especially if you're thinking about managerial issue, there are some mechanisms that can be orchestrated and managed, and other that are quite tricky to manage. But it's done through time. It's done through the vision and the mindset of the keystone, and that's it. So platform are just, you know, here, whatever we are talking about, a software platform or physical platform, they're just the place just to embark various players and to nurture these coevolution relationships. But there is no, just to summarize on this point, there is no silver bullet, you know, since every business ecosystem is unique. I guess that the Keystone organization has to find its way, and especially the way to manage this interaction through times. And it will depend, coevolution output will depend about this ability. And as you mentioned, it's also a question about of learning. You know, learning mechanisms are really central in what we talk about and what I've been saying about coevolution. And as you mentioned, it's clearly appear time matters once again. So it's very difficult to compare business ecosystem A from business ecosystem B, since they are unique, and you know all these things are done through time. So this is what makes ecosystem so exciting to study at the end. But yes, this was just a point about platforms and the role of interaction in triggering a coevolution mechanism.
So to summarize and to conclude, in our opinion, the key elements to remember are the following. First, there is only one type of real coevolution in business, and it is especially in business ecosystems, and it is the coevolution around the mutualist, the keystone. Second, the 6 key characteristics of inter-organizational coevolution are specificity, reciprocity, sequentiality, fixation, boundary crossing, and finally, organically derived. And the development of the capabilities that are needed for inter-organizational coevolution to happen depends on the internal and external coupling of these learning processes. And this coupling implies to internally develop transformative, innovative, and inventive capabilities, and externally to develop sensing, seizing, absorptive, desorptive, and connective capabilities. These capabilities that will be developed by the members of the ecosystem will not be the same. I mean, the keystone will not develop the same capabilities as the niche player, as the platform owner, or the partner or the supplier. Each type of actor within the ecosystem needs to develop specific capabilities to be able to trigger the co-evolutionary process. And finally, I would like to remind you what are, in our opinion, the critical capabilities that needs to emerge at the ecosystem level along the life cycle of the ecosystem. So I think despite of drawing you into more explanation, it would be better to answer your question and to focus on your specific interest to better adjust the content of our conversation with the question of the participants.
Yes, maybe there is a point we could investigate a little bit further, Xavier. It's about, you know, you were talking about technological capabilities. Can you give us some example about how it's achieved concretely? You know, we all think about when we talk about platforms, you know, and ecosystem, we all think about, for instance, Amazon.com, Airbnb. But for instance, in the case of Amazon, can you develop a little bit further about how this huge company, well-known companies, is just innovating at the end, and how did they capitalize on their existing ecosystem to craft new building blocks that will be incorporated in new feature and new services, etc., etc.
I was not thinking about Amazon, but you already explained it very well. But in fact, I was thinking about the French example, which is not very well known. It is about the Généton. The Généton is an amazing inter-organizational laboratory who is developing medicines to treat genetic disease. And in the history of the Généton, it took almost 30 years just to be able to build the initial community that will give birth to the ecosystem. So the birth of that ecosystem took more than 30 years. And finally, when they had enough money to invest in the development of the needed technology to sequence the human genome, it took them 2 years to develop the technology, but that development involves 3 different organizations that needed to work together. The first, there was an organization of doctors in medicine, an organization of scientists in genetic, and then an engineering company developing the robots, and they had to work together during 1 year to come up with a proper robot able to automatically extract DNA, purify DNA, and then sequence DNA. So in that particular case, it took 1 year of collaboration to align their technological knowledge and to finally reach the goal they wanted to achieve. So it's a long process. It can take time. Here we are talking about art science and machines. It's obvious that in digital ecosystem, the process can be much shorter and much faster. But the case of the Généton is one of the first French business ecosystem that is most of the time ignored by scholars. So let's go for the questions. I see that there are 3 questions that has been asked on the channel. The first question, can you explain the differences of value, timing, and process for the 3 convergent, co-adaptation, and coevolution, and what each bring? Oh, I'm not sure I understand the question. So if you could clarify it a bit, that would help us. What is it that you want to understand? The differences between convergent evolution, co-adaptation, and coevolution, or the differences between the value creation process, the timing? I'm not sure I understand. So Paul, could you please reformulate? It would help us a lot. So I can answer for, yes, thank you, Paul. I can answer at least the second part of the question. Huh? Convergent evolution in business is very simple to understand. In competitive mechanisms, it's very simple to give you some examples. For example, in the music industry, music companies tend to develop capabilities and business model which are very similar. And over 100 years of analysis, there is a paper analyzing 100 years of competition in the music industry. Very interesting. And they are showing what? All these companies are copying each other. They are trying to develop similar capabilities, similar business model to achieve what? Maintain their competitive advantage, survive with similar business model, and this will lead to a convergent evolution. There is no co-evolution here because they are not working together. They are fighting each other. So this is not co-evolution, but there is an evolution which is convergent because the best business models, they will always try to copy them to make sure they remain competitive. So this is convergent evolution. The difference between coevolution and convergent evolution is obvious here. Okay, it's not because one musical company is evolving in one specific direction that all the other companies in the same industry will evolve exactly in the same direction. They will tend to copy the same model, but with their own specificities, and they are not co-evolving around the same model or the same value proposition. Now, the difference with co-adaptation is that when you co-evolve around the development of an innovation, there is no coming back. I mean, the routines, the patterns of routines which are in each firm's member of the ecosystem at the beginning, and the patterns of routines at the end of the co-evolutionary process are completely different, and these partners cannot come back to the previous patterns. It's too late. They evolved so much in one specific direction for technological reasons, for structural reasons, cultural reasons, that they cannot come back to their previous state. And it is permanent. The change is permanent. In co-adaptation, you can come back. You collaborate once with the platform owner, with the keystone, and you provide the element that the keystone needed, and then you leave the ecosystem and you come back to your previous routine patterns. And this is not co-evolution. You just did collaborate once and you switch back to your previous structure, culture, routines, and this is not co-evolution. And this also happens regularly in ecosystems because partners tend to come in and to come out of the ecosystem very easily, especially at the birth and the expansion stage. But at the leadership and the self-renewal stage, it is much more difficult for the partners to leave because of the increasing level of interdependency, the increasing level of path dependency that connects them together.
When checking the comment and when listening to you, Xavier, I also have this question that just popped in my mind, you know, but I was thinking about co-evolution as a whole, you know, as the result of the evolution of a business ecosystem. Okay, so once maturity is there, we can often say that co-evolution is there too. But if we consider co-evolution as a public good, for instance, I've got a question on this topic. Can we consider co-evolution as a public good since it's share, the benefit of co-evolution are shared with other business partner, or are there a part of this value that is captured by the Keystone organization? So it's just about at the end who benefit from the all these co-evolution mechanism you describe.
Let me try to. I was looking at the questions on the channel. Let me try to take some concrete examples to help you understand. But we need to focus on one mechanism because there are so many mechanisms involved in the emergence and the reproduction of the co-evolutionary sequences within the ecosystem that we need to stick to one. So let's take one successful example and one failure example. Let's start with the failure. And I was thinking about the Nfc ecosystem in France. The Nfc ecosystem in France is an ecosystem who tried to develop the without contact payment technology. Okay, you was able to pay with your card or your phone without any contact, just by putting your card or your phone on a device. And this ecosystem started to take place a long time ago in France, in fact, and they tried to build it a long time ago. And at the end, it has been a huge failure. And why is it so? Because if at the beginning the core partners involved in the ecosystem really try to align their capabilities first and to co-evolve these capabilities to propose a technology that can be a standard, that can be applied in whatever type of business that could use it, at the end, the potential clients, the potential partners who could have bought the technology and used the technology were not involved enough in the ecosystem and never really aligned their capabilities with the core members of the ecosystem and never co-evolved with them. They collaborated with them, but very fast they left that NFC ecosystem, and without them, no possible application and no possible business, and it was a huge failure. So in that particular case, you see that the ecosystem NFC was able to attract these potential clients and potential companies able to apply the technology, but these companies never really participated in the co-creation of the value of the technology. They never really co-evolved with the core members of the ecosystem, and therefore they finally left the ecosystem, and it has been a failure. So in that case, coevolution happened at the birth and the start of the expansion, but they never reached the market. So you understand in that case that the problem was connected to the second stage, the inability to scale up the value proposition with the critical actors and to reach a large market to sell that technology. So the failure is connected to very specific ecosystemic capabilities that have not been built together with the right partners. Now let's take a successful example. Thierry, I will give you the answer.
Yeah, some people were talking or writing about Amazon.com, which I know this is a case you also know, but yes, maybe in the Amazon case, I would say it's different in the sense of course, Amazon is a successful business ecosystem today, but when looking at the development of Amazon Web Services, for instance, yes, they have ignited this kind of coevolution relationship with some of their partners. I mean, especially those which are techies, companies that are working on the development of Amazon Web Services, and that's it. This is an illustration, but to me, there is a really kind of coevolution between Amazon as a provider or an enabler of technology and all the other partners within its ecosystem that benefit from this technological development and that can clearly use Amazon Web Services for their current business. So to me, it's an example of a successful coevolution sequence. But once again, we have to keep in mind that up to now, Amazon.com is a mature, large ecosystem. So once again, time matters, and there are some sequences that you have to ignite before capitalizing on these to reach the next stage. And yes, it was about coevolution. Maybe another point you would like to discuss or to go to
yes,
enter?
Yes, we didn't answer the first question of Chandler Nagpal. So you are surprised to see the world maintaining the bargaining power. Isn't that against the basic principle of coevolution? And if bargaining power is a factor, coevolution wouldn't have happened in the first place. In fact, yes and no. Yes, if we were in a classical business outside a business ecosystem, I would say yes. But in the business ecosystem life cycle, you do not start with the bargaining power. The bargaining power is really happening at the leadership stage, when the ecosystem already exists, the value proposition is already on the market, and you are already fighting with competitors. And at that stage, if you want to keep your partners within the ecosystem and to keep your leadership on your market, you need to make sure that you increase your bargaining power with your customers and your partners. Otherwise, you can be sure you will lose your leadership. So surprisingly, at this stage, the boundaries of the ecosystem are no more that open. Usually they are closed because you don't want your partners to leave, and you don't want your competitors to be able to absorb these partners. So you need to make sure that your bargaining power with your partners is very important to keep them within the ecosystem. So I think this should answer your question, Chandler.
Yeah, there was another question that we take.
Yes, the last question of
yes,
Paul.
about the role of cultural aspects, you know, and within the whole phenomenon we are talking about. And for instance, there was a question about Amazon.com versus Alibaba, you know, about the importance of culture, I would say. And yes, for sure, if I have to reply to Anastasia's question, I do believe that there are cultural differences that explain, in a way or another, the development of the ecosystem we are talking. I mean, Amazon.com versus Alibaba. Yes, what else?
There is one last question, which is about do we go through these 3 stages of convergent evolution, co-adaptation, and then into co-evolution as normal? In fact, again, I think the formulation is connected to this slide. Let me find it for you here. Okay. What is important in business is that you cannot switch from a competitive relationship to a co-evolutive relationship in one day. This is obvious. Okay. Yeah. Usually, competitors will start to collaborate, but by going through cooperation, then soft collaboration and hard collaboration, and finally co-evolution, but it will take time. It will take a lot of times. And the switch from one type of interaction to another is taking time because of these learning processes that you need to achieve, to implement, to make sure that you are aligning progressively the capabilities, the goals, and finally collaborating, and finally working on a common innovation, a common goal, and that will help to trigger the first cycle of co-evolution. So you need to switch from competition to cooperation to collaboration. It takes time. These relationships are of different natures. They have different goals. And the level of dependency, interdependency, sorry, that you need to achieve takes time. And so, in my opinion, convergent evolution in the competition model, co-adaptation in the cooperative and the collaborative model, and then co-evolution, I agree, are stages that you have to go through before you really can reach co-evolution. So, Paul, yeah, this should answer your question.
And of course, it was also a point mentioned within the discussion, but from this point of view, I truly believe that, you know, policy and regulation matters, you know, in order to prepare the ground, I would say, and to, in a way, to not to force, but to it's a kind of stimulation, you know, for players within a specific era to say, okay, we can capitalize on regulation, on rules that have been produced by policymakers to ignite or to launch a business ecosystem, for instance. So once again, cultural dimension play a central role in what we mentioned, of course. But yeah, the main point also, since we're talking about culture, is the fact that the biggest part of business, of mature, successful business ecosystem, have a common feature. They still have an entrepreneurial mindset, and this is very, very interesting, especially if you compare those wannabe ecosystem. Okay, and this is a point that is closely related to me to the cultural dimension.
Okay, so as mentioned by Monica, we should start to wrap up
the discussion. Yeah.
So thank you very much again, Monica and Stuart, for this opportunity to present some ideas of our work. I am deeply sorry we were not able to interact directly with the participants to better understand their question and better answer their question. If you have any question, you can contact us through the Business Ecosystem Alliance platform, and we will be glad to answer your questions. It will be our pleasure. Thank you very much, all of you, for your participation. And we hope to hear from some of you very soon. I wish you all a good evening for me, good afternoon for a lot of the others.
Thanks a lot. Do not hesitate to send us some mail or to stay in touch with us if you want to discuss a little bit further about these very exciting topics, which is coevolution. Once again, thanks a lot.